Luke slammed the kitchen door so hard that Grandma's old spice shelf rattled, the cinnamon jar dancing dangerously close to the edge. He waved a contract like a victory flag. $75,000, he shouted. I flipped to the last page. My name stared back at me, Jenna Holloway, signed in that stiff, formal way I never use outside a DMV form. The date was last Tuesday. I was home that day, watching rain slide down the window, stirring chili. Someone had signed my name while I was right here. I'm Jenna, 28, head chef at Maggie's Smoke Bar, I said quietly, like I needed to hear my own name out loud. Luke's voice tried to sound casual. Networking at the market, he said. Networking? I asked. I stopped selling after the county shut me down in April. The Lone Star Bites logo, a white star with a bite missing, grinned back at me from the top of every page. The attached emails showed me confirming a tasting in downtown Austin. The timestamps matched the afternoon I was asleep, my phone dead beside my bed. This wasn't just forgery. Someone wanted me to see it. The kitchen smelled like cumin, tomatoes, and old sundaes when Grandma would hum while stirring. I dropped in 3 squares of chocolate and a pinch from the ivory jar she'd called frontier salt. The chili darkened into a richer red. Luke took a spoonful, expecting that sweet burn he loved. The awe in his eyes vanished. He coughed, choked, reached for water as though the chili had turned against him. The doctor's note says you're allergic to nothing, I said. He didn't answer. Clause 13 hid like a snake in the fine print. Ancillary rights. It gave Lone Star ownership of the Linscott Legacy brand, including likenesses and family stories. There was even a mock label, Grandma smiling in her red apron, standing on a rustic porch. The photo proof had a timestamp, March 19th last year, 10 years after her funeral. I turned the photo over. A faint watermark read, uploaded by Luke. What is this, Luke? I whispered. He looked away. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps, polite, familiar. I wiped my hands and opened the door. And there she was. Grandma stepped inside like she'd never left. Her eyes went straight to the stove. Counterclockwise, she repeated, as if the pot mattered more than my sanity. My mind split, one half cataloging the details, the apron strings, the lemon oil, the burn mark on her wrist, the other repeating the words sealed casket like a prayer. That morning, I'd found a note under the doormat. Don't sign anything, stir counterclockwise. I thought it was a joke. Tell her, Grandma said to Luke. Her voice was calm, flat, and practiced, the kind of voice you use when you've carried truth too long. Luke's composure cracked. He stumbled through fragments. Bastrop, another name, hiding her until the legal issue was over. I was protecting you, he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Enough, Grandma said. One word, heavy as a lifetime. I gripped the ivory jar. What kind of legal issue requires faking your own death? The kind that starts when you steal something that isn't yours, she said. No defense, no apology, just exhaustion. She told me about a man named Delmer Ruiz, a prison cook she met in 1986 during charity work. His chili was legendary, built out of scraps and Grandma had traded cigarettes and favors for his recipe, promising him a cut if she ever sold it. She never did. Years passed. Then a man claiming to be Del's nephew started calling, then visiting. The calls turned to threats, the visits to warnings. So she disappeared, leaving her funeral behind like an unpaid bill. I turned back to the contract. The $75,000 wasn't a prize. It was a buyout. Originator of record, Delmer Ruiz. The nephew had found his payment after all. Luke's initials sat neat and perfect on the witness line. Betrayal in a single stroke of ink. The escrow release date matched the same day my email was spoofed. He reached for me, trembling. I did everything to protect you, he said. This deal, it was meant to keep us safe, to make the danger stop. Grandma didn't even blink. She stared into the pot where the chili bubbled low and angry. Their tastings, she said quietly, weren't just tastings. Color drained from Luke's face. The kitchen seemed to shrink. The walls leaned closer. Outside, the wind pushed dead leaves across the porch like whispers, gathering courage. I turned to the window to breathe. A black car idled across the street. 2 men in suits stepped out. Their badges caught the porch light. Not a star, a bitten-star, the same logo from the contract. Jenna, Luke started. Don't, I said. Numbers don't lie, people do. I slid the contract back across the counter, open to clause 13. You sold my face, I said quietly. You sold her ghost. He flinched. Grandma reached past him and lowered the flame by a single breath. Patience is the secret spice, she murmured, like she used to on Sundays. Then she looked at me, not pleading, not guilty, just ready. Stir counterclockwise, she said softly. I set the spoon to the rim and began to stir. Outside, the men crossed the street. Inside, the chili turned. Slow, deliberate, angry sweet, like it finally remembered whose story it was. Luke, I said, the chili's heat still clinging to the air. You sold Grandma's recipe? He grinned like the contract had blessed him, not burned him. Correct our recipe. The front door creaked, and Dad stepped in from the porch, oil-stained hands smelling of motor grease. Let the boy talk, Jen. It's a smart business move. Smart sounded like sand in my teeth. That recipe was the last thread tying us to June Holloway, who built Holloway's diner with her knuckles. Luke sold the thread, then tugged the whole quilt loose. I spend nights coaxing smoke into brisket until strangers smile at a plate. Dad, Robert Holloway, keeps the diner running on coffee, pie, and stubbornness. Luke, 5 years older, grabbed the reins after Dad's first heart scare, then rode the books like a bronco he swore he could tame. Every morning at 8 a.m., Grandma June sits by the diner window with her crossword and a black coffee. She calls her puzzle Practice for Promises, which some people mistake for nostalgia. A family recipe is a promise, not a product, Grandma always said, and when I was little, I thought that meant recipes had souls. Now, standing in the kitchen with a forged deal on the table, I realize souls can be notarized if the ink is hungry enough. Luke tapped the contract like a magician showing a harmless deck. 75,000 today, more later. We're expanding. Expanding sounded like swelling after a bruise. Who gave permission? I asked. He didn't blink. Dad did. I turned to our father, whose silence had never felt so expensive. Dad scrubbed his hands with a rag that only smeared the grease. Times are tight. Your brother found a way to keep the lights on. The rag smudges were the same color as the circles under his eyes. And Grandma? I asked. Does the word promise ring a bell? He sighed like a car refusing to turn over. She'll understand once she sees the numbers. Before I could answer, the porch steps creaked again 2 pairs, measured and heavy. Through the lace curtain, I saw the bitten-star on polished badges, and the air thinned to wire. They entered without waiting for an invitation, suits stiff as ledger lines. Miss Holloway, the tall one said to me, not to Dad. I'm Mr. Pierce. This is Miss Garland. Lone Star Bites. He sniffed the room like he could appraise us by aroma. Congratulations on your partnership. I kept my face still. We didn't partner, I said. We were sold. Pierce smiled like we'd told him a joke he'd heard before. Paperwork says otherwise. He set down a glossy mock-up. Our label Grandma June in her red apron, porch light glowing. The porch was ours. The light wasn't. Luke reached eagerly for the mock-up. See? It looks professional. Miss Garland slid a second paper across. A schedule with fees that multiplied like dust bunnies, and a clause that made my stomach drop creative control for narrative accuracy. We'll handle the story, she said. Customers love legacy. Dad licked his lips. Legacy sells. I stared at the signature block of my name, tidy as a lie. I didn't sign, I said. You were represented, Pierce replied, spinning the folder to reveal a power of attorney form. The agent's name was familiar in the wrong way. Luke Holloway. Temporary authorization? Luke said quickly, just to get us past the starting line. The room fine-tuned into silence. Even the pot settled, as if listening. Dad's jaw clenched so hard it clicked. It's done, Jen, he said, a little too loud. We all benefit. I let the quiet hold for a count of 5, the way I do when simmering threatens to roll into boil. What did you trade for the extra advance? I asked Luke. He blinked. What extra? I tapped the line item. Early distribution consideration $25,000 wired prior to signing. The deposit account ended in digits I recognized. Dad's. Garland didn't flinch. Pierce did the smiling for both of them. The advance kept your diner current, he said, glancing at Dad's hands. We support our partners. Partners sounded like cuffs. You said narrative accuracy, I told Garland. What does that mean? She reached into her briefcase and produced a sepia photograph. Grandma June on our porch, apron crisp, smile soft. But the shadows were wrong for morning, and the sunline didn't match our maple tree's lean. "We've scheduled a brand shoot tomorrow with alternate options if she can't make it," Garland said, sliding out a second image. It was Grandma's face, carefully composited on mine. Dad moved first, hand flat on the table. "You don't put my mother's face on my daughter," he growled. The air split on his words, sharp as a snapped belt. Garland's gaze stayed cool. "We're aligning eras. Consumers need a single icon." Luke tried to laugh and landed on a wheeze. "Let's not get dramatic." I tasted iron at the back of my throat. "She'll be at the diner at 8, I said, surprising myself. "You can ask her what an icon wants." Pierce raised an eyebrow. "Your grandmother is available?" "Every morning," I said. "Unless you already knew that." Pierce considered, then nodded. "Good. We'll finalize it there." He closed the folder. The bitten-star winked. "One more detail: our council has questions about the originator of the record, Delmer Ruiz. We'll need your grandmother's affidavit to confirm lineage." The name struck the room like a dropped pan. Dad flinched. Luke glanced at the floor, and my pulse began to count in reverse. Pierce didn't notice the wobble, or pretended not to. "Tomorrow at 8, he repeated, and the suits left with the weather. The door clicked. Silence spread like spilled coffee. I looked at Dad. "You knew about Del." He looked away, out toward the maple that gave the road its name. "Your mother asked me to forget," he said softly, which wasn't the same as denying. Luke folded the mock-up, too careful with the paper to be careful with us. "This can still be good," he whispered. Behind him, the contract waited like a bear trap asking for a handshake. I picked it up, fanned the pages, and in the stapled thickness, I found a thin envelope addressed to me, postmarked last week. The return address said Bastrop, but the handwriting was Grandma's. The first time I saw the billboard on I-35, I nearly wrecked my car. The smiling face of Grandma June beamed down in perfect high definition. The red apron, the ladle, the chili steaming like home. Only one thing was missing. Lone Star Bites presents Grandma June's famous chili, a Texas tradition. They'd erased the word Holloway, my family's name, gone like a seasoning someone forgot to mention. I pulled over at the next exit, heart pounding faster than the wipers in the drizzle. My phone buzzed with messages from coworkers. "Jenna, this your grandma? Congrats on the ad. Thought you hated corporate stuff?" Each word tightened the knot in my chest. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I turned the car around and drove straight to Round Rock, to Lone Star's glass-walled headquarters, a cube of steel pretending to be progress. The lobby smelled of citrus cleaner and ambition. A receptionist with a badge that said Chloe smiled like she'd been trained to defuse dynamite. "Can I help you?" she asked. I dropped the crumpled photo I'd taken of the billboard onto her desk. "Yeah," I said. "Tell me who gave you permission to use my grandmother's face." Chloe blinked twice, then typed something into her computer. "That would be under our licensing department," she said, and handed me a numbered card like I was waiting for a latte instead of justice. An assistant escorted me into a small office, walls lined with framed chili awards and stock photos of Texas sunsets. "Proof of licensing," I said before she could start her script. She opened a folder, slid it toward me, and there it was, black ink on white paper, official as sin. Licensing agreement June M. Holloway. Grandma's name, her neat cursive replaced with Luke's slanted handwriting. My brother had forged her signature. My vision went watery at the edges, the room spinning slow and mean. "You're shaking," the clerk said softly. I pressed my palms flat on the desk. "I'm fine." The air tasted like aluminum, and I knew if I didn't leave, I'd start screaming. She hesitated, then leaned closer. "If you're family, you might want to look at this too." She slid another document halfway out of the folder, a notarized photo release form. The notary stamp read, March 19th. The witness, Robert Holloway, my father. I walked out before she could say anything else. Outside, the air was sharp with rain. I leaned against my car, shaking so hard I dropped my keys. Luke's betrayal, I could almost understand greed, desperation, that restless fire that always burned too bright in him. But Dad? Dad had been the keeper of Grandma's promise. He stood at her funeral, handed over her casket, and said, "We'll guard her name." And now he'd handed it away for a signature bonus. I drove without thinking, the highway lights streaking past like angry ghosts. The billboard loomed again on the return trip, its colors too bright, its smile too wrong. I stared up at Grandma's face, that digital forgery of love, and for a split second, I thought I saw it change. Maybe it was the rain distorting the image, or maybe I was losing my grip, but her mouth seemed to curve differently, not in a smile, but in warning. Back in Austin, I pulled into the diner's parking lot. The windows glowed with the soft light of closing time. Inside, Luke sat at the counter, flipping through invoices. Dad was in the corner booth, his shoulders slumped, the same grease-stained rag in his hands. "You've seen it," Luke said without looking up. His tone was casual, but his knuckles were white on the paper. "We're finally in the big leagues, Jen." "You forged her name," I said. My voice sounded calm, but my hands were trembling. Dad lifted his eyes slowly. "We all signed off," he murmured. "It's done." "No," I said, stepping closer. "It's stolen." "And it's not over." Luke stood up, taller than me, but not taller than my anger. "You think this family survives on sentiment?" "We were drowning, Jenna. Lone Star threw us a rope. I looked between them. My brother, my father, two men who'd sold a woman's memory for a paycheck. A rope," I said quietly. "Or a noose." Luke's grin faltered. "You don't understand how deep this goes." "Then tell me," I snapped. The door creaked open behind me before he could answer. A woman stepped in, tall, rain-soaked, carrying a black leather folder embossed with the bitten-star logo. Her eyes met mine. "Ms. Holloway," she said, "I'm afraid your grandmother's estate has been reopened. There are some discrepancies in the death records we need to discuss." Dad's rag slipped from his hand. Luke turned pale. I didn't move. "What kind of discrepancies?" I asked. The woman smiled, professional and cold, the kind that suggests your grandmother may not be dead after all. That evening, the rain had thinned to a mist over St. Catherine's care home. The halls smelled of antiseptic and lilies, half healing, half funeral. Grandma June lay propped against her pillows in room 217, her skin thin as paper, but her eyes still burning that quiet, dangerous blue. I sat beside her, holding her hand, the same hand that once taught me to fold dough and stir patience into everything worth eating. She exhaled softly. "Luke always did chase shiny things," she whispered. "Don't let him sell your soul too, honey." Her voice cracked on the last word like it had broken through something sharp. I smiled faintly, though my heart wasn't in it. "He already tried," I said. Grandma turned her head, those lake-colored eyes catching mine. "Then you better start fighting smart, not loud." Her gaze shifted to the nightstand, where a small wooden box sat beside her water glass. When she opened it, the scent of old paper and chili powder escaped like memory itself. Inside was the card from the original recipe, the one I'd only seen behind the diner's glass frame once. She slid it into my palm. "This belongs to the Holloways," she said. I turned it over. On the back, in faded blue ink, she'd written a single line. "Whoever cooks this with heart owns the name." I looked up, confused. "Grandma, what does that mean?" She smiled the way people do when they know something you don't. "It means the papers don't matter. The story does." Her hand trembled as she pulled mine closer. "There's more, Jenna." She coughed lightly, and I leaned forward. "That Chili Dell didn't invent it alone. It came from someone else, someone the world forgot. I just kept it alive." Her words thinned into a whisper. "You'll find the truth where the smoke never fades." I frowned. "What smoke?" But she was already drifting, her breath slowing, eyelids fluttering like soft curtains in the wind. A monitor beeped in steady rhythm. I thought she'd fallen asleep until the beeping flatlined. Nurses rushed in, the air suddenly too bright, too loud. I stood frozen, the recipe card pressed to my chest. They worked over her, gentle but efficient. One nurse glanced at me and shook her head. "She's gone," she said softly. But as they wheeled Grandma away, her hand slipped off the bed rail, and something small fell to the floor. A brass key, warm as if it had just been in her grip. I picked it up, the tag etched with 3 letters, HDR. I didn't know it yet, but those letters would unearth everything she'd buried. Outside, the rain had stopped. I sat in my car, staring at the key under the dashboard light. Holloway Diner records? Hidden door room? My brain spun possibilities until one stuck. The diner. Grandma used to lock her personal ledgers in the pantry safe behind the spice racks. Maybe the key belonged there. I started the engine. The hospital's parking lights stretched across the wet pavement like veins leading back to the heart of something waiting to beat again. By the time I reached the diner, it was past midnight. The neon sign buzzed weakly, Holloway's flickering like it couldn't decide if it still existed. Inside, the smell of onions and old oil clung to the air. I passed the counter, the booth where Dad always sat, the window where Grandma used to wave at early customers. Everything felt ghosted, hollow. I slipped behind the counter and reached for the spice rack 3 shelves deep, dusty and forgotten. My fingers found the latch, cold and stiff. The brass key slid in smoothly, almost eager. The lock clicked open. Behind the rack was a shallow compartment lined with tin. Inside, wrapped in wax paper, were old photographs and 3 envelopes tied with faded ribbon. The first photo stopped my breath. Grandma in her 20s, standing beside a man in a prison uniform. He wasn't Dell. The second was Luke, shaking hands with a man in a Lone Star bite suit. The third photo was the strangest. The same man in uniform, older now, standing behind the diner counter last year, alive and smiling. I untied the ribbon from the envelopes. The first contained receipts payments to someone named R. Delmer Ruiz. The second held letters unsigned, but written in Grandma's looping hand. I did what I had to do. Forgive me. The third was a copy of a contract stamped with the Lone Star logo and a single signature line. Authorized Representative, J.M. Holloway. My name. The date? Tomorrow's. The door creaked. I spun around, clutching the papers. A silhouette filled the diner entrance broad shoulders, slick hair, the smell of cologne and danger. You shouldn't be here, Jenna, Luke said, stepping into the light. His smile was slow, practiced. They know you have the recipe now. How do you know that? I asked. He took another step closer, eyes glinting. Because I told them. By Saturday morning, the diner smelled like home again. Onions sweating in butter, cumin blooming in the pan, and the slow, deep burn of chili simmering on the back stove. I'd slept maybe 3 hours, but the exhaustion felt like fuel. Luke's locks had come off the side window before sunrise, and I'd pried the boards loose with the same crowbar Dad once used to hang Grandma's sign. The closed tag dangled upside down now, swinging like a dare. When I slid open the window, the first few customers were curious local neighbors who remembered when Grandma June used to ladle chili into paper bowls every winter Sunday. You back in business, Jenna? Old Mr. Kirkland asked, clutching his hat. Not exactly, I said, handing him a steaming bowl. Today, it's free. His eyes widened, then softened. June would like that, he said. I smiled. That's the point. Within an hour, word spread faster than wildfire. Cars lined both sides of Maple Ridge Road, people pouring out families, students, even truckers from the highway who'd seen the buzz online. Someone live-streamed it. Someone else tagged a reporter. Soon, a van from Austin Daily News pulled up, cameras rolling, microphones thrust toward the window. Chef Holloway, one called. Why give away something that could make you a fortune? I wiped my hands on my apron and leaned out just enough for the mic. Because this recipe was never for sale, I said. The crowd erupted in applause that rattled the window glass. Somewhere in the noise, I thought I heard Grandma's laugh, the real one, not the billboard version. By evening, #Grandma's Chili was trending across Texas. I saw my own face on phone screens, sweaty, determined, alive. Donations started pouring into the diner's Venmo even though I never asked. Strangers offered legal help, design work, free press. The whole state seemed to pick a side, and it wasn't Lone Star's. But just as the sun began to sink and I was refilling another pot, a black SUV rolled up to the curb, its tinted windows swallowing the applause. The driver's door opened. Luke stepped out, dressed too sharply for a Saturday, eyes dark behind sunglasses. He waited for the crowd to notice him, but they didn't. They were too busy cheering for bowls of chili. His jaw tightened as he cut through the line, ignoring the mutters that followed. When he reached the window, I didn't stop stirring. If you're here for seconds, I said, you'll have to wait your turn. He smirked. Cute. You're trending, little sister. Congratulations. But you should know Lone Star's lawyers are trending too. He held up a folder embossed with the Bitten-Star logo. Cease and desist. Trademark infringement. Unauthorized distribution. I laughed, though it sounded more like a bark. You mean theft. You stole the name? I'm just taking it back. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You're making this worse. They're not playing fair anymore. I met his gaze. Neither am I. He slid a paper onto the counter, the legal threat gleaming under the diner lights. You don't understand, Jenna. This isn't just about a recipe anymore. His voice cracked slightly, and for a moment the edge slipped, revealing something close to fear. They know about Grandma. They know she's alive. My breath caught. What? Luke nodded once. Barely. Someone at St. Catherine's leaked her records. They're looking for her now, claiming fraud, contract violations, and a false death certificate. I felt the world tip sideways. She just died, I said. I was there. He shook his head. Then explain this. From his jacket pocket, he pulled a photo, grainy and recent. Grandma June outside a brick building, wearing the same red apron, smiling. The timestamp? Yesterday. I stumbled back, gripping the counter. That's impossible. Luke looked at me, hollow. You think I don't know that? His voice dropped to a whisper. They're using her. Somehow. Before I could answer, a flash exploded camera bulbs from the crowd. Reporters were shouting questions, phones recording. Luke turned his face away. You need to stop this before it's too late, he said. But it was already too late. Across the street, another van had pulled up, this one with the Lone Star logo emblazoned across its side. 2 men in suits stepped out, carrying a covered crate between them. They walked toward us through the crowd, their expressions unreadable. One of them lifted the lid just enough for me to see what was inside. Jars of chili with Grandma's face on the label still warm, like they'd been cooked hours ago. The expiration date printed in black ink read, "Tomorrow." And under the logo, smaller than the rest, was a tagline that made my stomach twist. Approved and signed by June M. Holloway. By the time the reporters crowded around the window, the diner felt like the center of a storm, cameras flashing, voices overlapping, the smell of chili and rebellion thick in the air. I'd been answering questions for 20 minutes straight, about the recipe, about Lone Star, about Grandma's legacy. The words came easy now. I wasn't fighting anymore, I was reclaiming. Every ladle I poured felt like a verdict served hot. Then the door slammed open so hard the bell above it gave up and fell. Luke stormed in, his Lone Star Bites apron smeared with grease, pride, and maybe guilt. The cameras turned instantly, hungry for drama. He jabbed a finger toward me. You're sabotaging the family, he shouted, voice cracking under the weight of too many lies. The crowd gasped. I just looked at him, at the same brother who used to sneak into Grandma's kitchen to steal spoonfuls of chili before church. You did that, I said evenly, when you sold it. The silence after hit harder than his words. Then, with a roar of frustration, Luke slammed his palm on the counter. The pot of chili teetered and fell, splattering across the floor in a red wave. Gasps, camera flashes, whispers. The smell of scorched cumin filled the air like an accusation. For a heartbeat, all I could hear was the hiss of the ruined pot cooling on tile. Then, from the corner booth, a familiar voice broke through the chaos. Grandma sat there, as calm as the eye of the storm, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. The crowd hadn't even noticed her come in. Told you not to mess with my girl's recipe, she murmured, lifting her cup in a lazy toast. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone started clapping. The tension cracked, but Luke froze, staring at her like he'd seen a ghost. You're supposed to be, he started, and then stopped, choking on the word. Dead. She smiled, slow and wicked. Surprised I didn't stay buried, huh? Every reporter turned their cameras toward her, lenses zooming, shutters snapping. Grandma June Holloway alive, unbothered, and drinking diner coffee as though she hadn't faked her death a decade ago. The world outside the diner was about to go wild, and I could already feel it vibrating through every phone in the room. Luke's face drained of color, his confidence unraveling like a frayed apron string. They said you were gone, he whispered. You signed. I didn't sign a damn thing, Grandma interrupted, standing slowly. Her height might have shrunk, but her presence filled every corner of the diner. You forged me, boy. You sold my soul for $1 and a headline. She walked toward him, steady, unflinching. And worse, you dragged your sister into the fire. The cameras ate it up, reporters whispering, microphones angling closer. Luke backed away, eyes darting toward the door. "You don't understand," he said. "They forced me. He stopped again, realizing too late that every word was being recorded. I stepped out from behind the counter, chili still dripping from the edge, and faced him squarely. "Then tell the truth, Luke. Who's pulling your strings?" Before he could answer, the diner lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Gasps and murmurs filled the darkness. Someone dropped a camera. The sound of shattering glass echoed like a gunshot. I reached for Grandma's hand, but she wasn't beside me anymore. "Grandma?" I called, squinting through the dim emergency glow from the soda machine. Nothing. Then the lights flicked back on, harsh and white. Luke was gone too. The crowd buzzed with confusion. The doorway hung open, the bell still trembling. Grandma's coffee cup sat abandoned, half full and still warm. The only thing left on the table was her old recipe card, the same one she'd given me at St. Catherine's. But now, scrawled across the back in fresh black ink, were 4 new words. "Don't trust the window." Outside, the Lone Star van was still parked across the street, its back doors ajar. I could have sworn I saw movement inside, like a shadow shifting. My pulse jumped. "Luke!" I shouted, rushing to the door. Rain started again, soft and deceptive. I stepped out, scanning the street, but the van was gone, and so was he. Only a dark smear of chili led from the diner's entrance down the road, disappearing into the night. Behind me, the crowd murmured, confused, excited, scared. Reporters whispered about conspiracies, faked deaths, corporate cover-ups. I closed the diner door and locked it. Through the glass, my reflection stared back at the red-stained apron, tired eyes, and Grandma's words echoing in my head. "Don't let him sell your soul too, honey." Somewhere out there, Luke was running, and I had a feeling he wasn't running from Lone Star anymore. He was running from Grandma. By Monday morning, the storm had broken not over my diner, but over Luke. The same company he worshipped had cut him loose before sunrise. Lone Star Bites released a statement that sounded polished, legal, and merciless. "Mr. Luke Holloway's contract has been terminated due to breach of ethics, forgery, and misrepresentation." They didn't even use his title, just his name, hanging there like a caution sign. Their lawyers moved fast. They cited Grandma's original recipe card, the one written in her own faded blue ink, as the true ownership document. The clause, "Whoever cooks this with heart owns the name," had baffled Lone Star's attorneys at first. But when the local judge reviewed the case, he ruled that the phrase was legally binding in intent and spirit. The irony was delicious. For the first time, Grandma's belief that food was a promise, not a product, became more than sentiment. It became law. By noon, Luke's name had vanished from every billboard. The digital displays that once showed his grin now flickered blank, replaced by error codes and silence. Lone Star pulled every jar with his signature from the shelves. He'd been scrubbed out of their story like a smudge they regretted ever letting in. He tried to fight it, of course. Claimed I'd framed him, that I'd stolen the real card, doctored the paperwork, manipulated the media. But the truth was already public property. Footage of him yelling in the diner, the forged signatures, the hidden payments all aired on the evening news. Austin had its scandal of the week, and Luke Holloway was the villain. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Watching him drown in the same spotlight he'd chased was punishment enough. That night, I drove out to the old house on Maple Ridge where we grew up. The porch light still flickered the way it had since Mom's last Christmas. Dad was sitting there, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. The radio beside him hummed with the news. Another segment about Luke, another headline. He didn't look up when I stepped onto the porch. "It's done," I said softly. He nodded, slow and tired. "Yeah," he murmured. "They finally buried him alive." Or, his voice cracked just enough to show that underneath the disappointment, there was still love bruised and weary. I sat beside him. For a while, we just listened to the crickets and the occasional car passing by. "He called me this morning," Dad said finally. "Said they froze his accounts, blacklisted his name. He's broke. Jenna, I didn't answer. Said he was sorry, too. Still, I stayed quiet. But then he said something strange." Dad looked at me, eyes shadowed. "He said Grandma wasn't done with us yet." I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? He shook his head. Didn't say, but he sounded off, like he'd seen something he couldn't explain. Dad rubbed his hands together, restless. You don't think she's really… He stopped himself, as if saying the word alive might invite something we weren't ready for. Before I could respond, the porch light flickered again once, twice, then steadied. The radio's static deepened, and a voice cut through, faint but distinct. The Holloway name belongs to the flame. I glanced at Dad. You hear that? He nodded slowly, his expression turning grim. That wasn't the announcer. I grabbed the radio, twisting the dial, but the voice didn't come again. Just static, and the low hum of the night. Maybe interference, I said, trying to sound rational. But Dad's silence told me he wasn't convinced. Neither was I. Later, when I went back to the diner to lock up, I noticed something strange. On the counter, beside the register, sat Grandma's old coffee mug, the same one she'd left behind after Luke's outburst. I could have sworn I'd taken it home after the crowd cleared, yet here it was again, clean and full, steam curled from the rim. Beside it, resting against the mug, was a folded napkin. I hesitated, then opened it. 4 words written in looping, faded blue ink stared back at me. The recipe isn't finished. I looked toward the booth where Grandma had sat that day. The seat was empty, but the cushion was warm, as if someone had just stood up. 3 months later, the diner felt emptier, quieter, like every pot and spoon knew something was missing. Grandma June had passed peacefully in her sleep, her stubborn heart finally tired from carrying so many secrets. The news didn't hit me all at once. It came in soft waves, the smell of cinnamon when I opened the pantry, the echo of her slippers on the linoleum, the phantom hum of her voice saying, "Keep stirring, Jenna." Her funeral was held at St. Mary's Church in South Austin, the same one where she used to volunteer every Thanksgiving. The morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, painting the pews in shades of ruby and gold chili colors, I thought. The casket sat at the front, small and polished, surrounded by flowers that couldn't compete with the scent of the food she'd left behind in our memories. I stood near the altar, the recipe card in my hand, the same card she'd given me in the hospital that night. The ink had faded a little more, but the words still pulsed with her spirit. Whoever cooks this with heart owns the name. I stepped forward when the preacher asked if anyone wanted to say a few words. My knees were trembling, but my voice held steady. Grandma taught us that love is the secret ingredient, I said, my throat tightening. Without it, everything tastes like ash. People nodded, some smiling, some crying quietly. She built more than a diner. She built a promise. And no matter who tried to sell it, she never let it die. I placed the recipe card into the casket and whispered, "It's home now." When I turned back, Dad was standing by the front pew. His face was drawn, but peaceful. For the first time since all of this began, he looked at me not with regret, not with pity, but with pride. He reached out, squeezing my hand, and I felt something between us heal in that moment. "She'd be proud of you, Jenna," he said softly. "You did what none of us could. You kept her name alive." After the service, people lingered in the churchyard, swapping stories about Grandma, her sass, her chili, the way she'd threatened to haunt anyone who oversalted the stew. Even the Lone Star reporters who'd shown up to cover her life rather than her scandal wiped their eyes before heading back to their cars. But one face caught my attention. A man standing by the fence, hat low, hands in his coat pockets. He wasn't from the neighborhood. I recognized him instantly from the old photo I'd found in the diner's secret compartment, the prison cook, Delmer Ruiz. Only now he looked older, slower, but alive. He nodded once when he saw me looking, then turned to leave. Instinct pulled me forward. "Mr. Ruiz," I called. He stopped but didn't turn. "She wanted me to tell you something," I said, my voice shaking. "She said she was sorry." That made him pause. "Sorry for what?" he asked without facing me. "For not keeping her promise. For taking something that was yours." He was silent for a long moment before answering. "Your grandma kept more promises than most folks ever try," he said quietly. "And that chili? It was never really mine, or hers. It belonged to whoever remembered where it came from." Then he glanced over his shoulder, his eyes still sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "You've got her hands, you know. Careful with what they stir. Some recipes cook up ghosts. Before I could reply, he turned the corner and disappeared down the street, leaving only the faint smell of tobacco and smoke behind him. That night, back at the diner, I sat in Grandma's old booth, staring at the empty spot where the recipe card used to hang. The place was still. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees along Maple Ridge Road. I ran my hand over the table, tracing the grain, remembering her laughter echoing off these same walls. Then faintly, I heard something, a soft hum coming from the kitchen. I stood and followed the sound. The stove light was on, though I hadn't touched it. A pot sat on the back burner, simmering gently. Steam curled in the air, rich and familiar. I lifted the lid, and there it was, Grandma's chili, bubbling, perfect, waiting. My heart jumped. "Grandma?" I whispered. The room answered with silence, and then, barely audible, her voice seemed to drift through the steam. "Keep stirring, Jenna. It's your turn now." The spoon in the pot began to move slow, steady, counterclockwise. I turned the open sign to closed, checked the locks, and stood under the hum of the kitchen hood listening to the steady thrum of simmering chili, the kind of sound that keeps a person from coming apart. Then the neon outside crackled, dimmed, and flared again, as a phone I didn't recognize buzzed on the counter with a single text, HDR, 3 a.m., come alone. And when I looked up, someone had slid an envelope under the... Inside the envelope was a photo of Grandma standing beside the diner's roof hatch, pointing at something just out of frame, along with a torn index card that smelled faintly of smoke and cumin. Whoever feeds first, owns first, and in the corner, a thumb-smudged fingerprint that wasn't hers, because it matched the tiny crescent scar Luke gave himself lighting sparklers with a Zippo when we were kids. I should have called Dad, the police, or at least a friend with more sense than me, but the diner's shadows felt like a promise I had to keep. I pocketed the HDR key from Grandma's hospital nightstand, the brass tag cold as a coin on my palm, and drove through sleeping Austin toward the old stockyards where the fairgrounds rot at the edges like a memory we don't admit to, because the only thing worse than losing a legacy is letting someone else finish the story for you. At 3 a.m., the world holds its breath, and the stockyard held mine. Floodlights carved out a square of pale dirt where a man waited beside a chain-link gate, his Lone Star apron swapped for a dark jacket that fit like an apology Luke, jittery and thin as a matchstick, lifting his hands as if my anger were a gun I'd already drawn. "I didn't send the text," he said, but before I could answer, a second figure stepped from the shadows wearing a hat like a question mark Delmer Ruiz, older than the last time I'd seen him at the churchyard fence, a slow smile tugging at his mouth as he tipped his brim and said, "Evening, chef," like we were meeting for pie and not a reckoning. Dell's eyes were soft but edged with that prison steel time never files down. He tapped the brass tag in my palm. "HDR," he said, "doesn't stand for Holloway Diner Roof, though your grandma loved a good misdirection. It's Holloway Document Repository, a safe deposit box she paid on with nickels during hard years and secrets during the rest. Bring your key, we bring mine, and the judge stops being your worst problem." Before I could ask whose worst problem the judge was, headlights burned across the yard, and a black van rolled to a stop with the grace of a bad idea. Two men climbed out Pierce and Garland's clean-handed colleagues with a crate between them and smiles that looked least, because nothing owns a face faster than a paycheck about to bounce. "Miss Holloway," the taller one said, "company property was unlawfully removed from our brand archive." And at first I thought he meant the copy of Grandma's recipe framed above my register, but then he lifted the crate lid to show 8 glass jars gently sweating Grandma June's famous chili, each cap stamped with tomorrow's date, each label signed June M. Holloway in a handwriting I knew intimately because it was my own, traced over until it impersonated love. Luke cleared his throat, fear and pride wrestling inside him like two stray dogs, and murmured, "They don't cook it anymore, Jenna. They print it." And when I stared blankly, he shrugged with a shame I recognized, a lab on South Congress flavor printers, lipid gels, algorithmic spice. They filmed me stirring what was basically steam, then deep-faked Grandma onto my face for socials. That thing on the billboard was never her. The men didn't blink because they were rehearsed for worse. One produced papers thick enough to muffle a conscience and waved at the floodlights as if the law were something you slide across a table rather than something that crawls into your bed. Dell exhaled and said, "Enough theater," then stepped forward with a badge I didn't see coming, not a cop's badge, but a county trustee's seal with conservator ad litem etched around the star, because while I was scrubbing burnt pots, he'd been guarding our name on the quiet. "Old debts make strange bedfellows," he told the suits, "and older promises make better locks," then turned to me. "Your grandma set up a culinary trust in 1987. The corpus isn't money. It's the recipe as a living practice. Whoever keeps feeding without gatekeeping maintains control." And he said it like a prayer that had teeth, because half the county had eaten free from that window the day I'd opened it out of anger that tasted like grace. The suits sneered as if generosity were a nuisance they could litigate into submission. One reached under his jacket, and I braced for something worse than a letter opener, but he only pulled out a phone glowing with a warrant request already typed, because in their world you point a screen and the future clicks, except. Dell didn't flinch. He pointed past them at the horizon, where dawn was scrubbing the city pink, and said, "Judge Kincaid signs nothing before coffee," then lifted his chin toward me. We left the men blinking in their own floodlights and peeled out in Dell's old Buick, the bench seat smelling like menthol and spilled chili. Luke jammed between us like a question neither of us wanted to ask. We drove to a limestone bank that looked like a post office, and a tomb had a stubborn child. Inside, a sleepy guard eyed our IDs and examined the twin keys Dell's tarnished, mine bright as if good stories required patina to pass inspection. The vault swallowed us in chilled air and quiet judgment, and a box the size of a loaf of bread slid forward on rails that squeaked like a mouse too proud to complain. Inside the box lay three things: a hand-labeled reel-to-reel tape marked 1960, booth interview, a handwritten deed on onion skin paper transferring June's Diner not to an heir, but to a community kitchen trust contingent on feeding the public free once a season, and a Polaroid of Grandma laughing with a man I didn't recognize under a sign that read, "Camp Smoke Holloway Volunteer Fire Brigade." At the bottom lay a folded napkin in faded blue ink. "Don't trust the window, be the window." Luke whistled low, the sound teenagers make when the world starts grading them. "She hid it in plain sight," he said, and I wanted to swat him for catching up late, but grief has a soft spot for slow learners when they're family. Dell pressed 2 fingers to the deed like he was testing for a pulse and said, "This kills Lone Star's claim if a judge with a backbone breathes on it," then tapped the tape, and that takes the air out of their lungs. We found a reel-to-reel in the bank's community room, used for AA meetings and retired scout troops. I threaded the tape while Dell poured convenience store coffee into paper cups that tasted like blame. The machine warbled, hissed, then cleared to Grandma's laugh, young, wild, a troublemaker's bell, and the deep voice of a radio host announcing, "Booth interview, June Holloway on cooking for a cause." "Food's just a story you can eat," young Grandma said, her vowels still round from a childhood that hadn't yet baked hard. I stole and borrowed and begged every spice I could until I found a way to feed folks who had nothing, and then I promised the recipe to the public, because hungry mouths are a better bank than any safe I ever hid. If you're listening to this, stop arguing over my bones and go make a pot for somebody who didn't ask. The tape clicked, paused, then resumed with a voice I didn't expect my mother's, younger, alive, and stubborn, saying, "Mama, what about the brand?" And Grandma answering, "Baby, brands belong to cattle, names belong to people. This one belongs to anyone who remembers to feed without fear." And the machine clicked again, like a judge's pen satisfied with its own verdict. Luke wiped his face with his sleeve and tried to laugh, but the sound landed crooked. "They can't fight that," he said. And Dell shook his head slowly, because men who've met real violence know phrases like "can't" and "fight" are wishful spices. "They'll set the building on fire before they set down the pen," he muttered, and sometimes prophecy smells like old smoke. We drove back to Maple Ridge with the deed, the tape, and a stubborn hope you could lean a ladder against. The neon was still flickering, trying to decide whether morning meant mercy. When I turned the corner, My chest dropped, smoke blooming from the diner's roof like a black flower opening in fast forward, the window glass buckling from heat as if it remembered every argument we'd had about what belonged to whom. I ran before the car stopped, Luke on my heels, Dell close enough to catch us if panic made us clumsy. Flames licked the eaves where Grandma had pointed in that midnight photo, as if she'd been telling me yesterday where to look today. Inside, alarms screamed and the kitchen roared, and I grabbed the nearest extinguisher to discover someone had discharged it earlier to dust, because sabotage does its homework. Neighbors poured from houses like prayers with feet. Someone yanked a hose from a side yard. Someone else hauled baking soda in sacks. A woman in slippers formed a bucket brigade with men in work boots and kids in superhero pajamas, because community is just choreography done without practice. I ran the length of the counter shouting instructions I didn't know I had until I had them shut the gas, batter the grease fire, break the window for venting but not the one that pulls the draft, because the window can save you or swallow you. A fire truck screamed around the corner. Camp smoke the same words from the Polaroid, and for a heartbeat I thought I'd fallen into the past. Volunteers hustled like a dance, and at their center a woman in a soot-dark helmet lifted her visor to reveal eyes I'd know in a blackout mom. Older, lined, alive, and steady as a stove that never sputters. She didn't hug me. She handed me a mask and shouted, "South line first!" As if we'd always been doing this together. Later, someone told me the volunteer brigades keep different names on paper when they need to, that my mother hadn't died so much as left after Grandma's first stage disappearance because some debts aren't monetary and some goodbyes are logistics. For now, all I knew was that the diner was bleeding smoke, and my mother was here holding the wound closed. We contained the burn to the roofline and singed pride. Inside, the kitchen was blackened but standing, and the pot on the back burner had done its stubborn simmering miracle, the chili still warm, still waiting, still ours. Mom pulled off her helmet and looked at me with a softness that could crack concrete, then at Luke with a softness that asked for better days. "He told them where to hit us," she said without accusation, and he flinched like truth had hands. Luke shoved a flash drive into my palm as if it were a hot coal he was done holding. "Internal emails, contracts, the Flavor Lab files, Pierce's side deals," he said, eyes red from smoke and regret. "Dad reached out to them first when my gambling debt got ugly after his heart scare. I said yes because I thought I could fix it from the inside. I couldn't, so I made it worse. And the thing about real confession is that it makes everyone in the room look down, even the righteous." Dad arrived pale and shaking, his old truck coughing like a sinner in a pew. He saw Mom and went very still, then did a small laugh that sounded like surrender. "I tried to buy us time," he said to me, "and sold our name instead." And to her, he said nothing out loud, because decades of absence don't accept the currency of quick apologies. But he took her hand with a care that didn't ask for absolution, which is the only way to earn any. By noon, the street was a picnic of firefighters, neighbors, and customers who refused to leave. Someone set up folding tables. Someone else brought cornbread from a trunk like a magician pulls scarves from sleeves, and I rolled a backup pot out the back door committee style. I ladled bowls until my wrist throbbed and my heart shook loose a stone it had been swallowing, because feeding people is grief's favorite antidote. News vans arrived in a litter of cables and declarations. I climbed onto a milk crate, held up the deed in one hand and the napkin in the other, and told the cameras what the tape had told me. This recipe is a trust, not a trademark. It belongs to the ones who cook it with heart and serve it without gatekeeping. I hit play on a clean recording of Grandma's 1960 interview using a borrowed speaker, and the sound of her young defiance poured down Maple Ridge like cool water on a stubborn fire. A county judge who lives 3 blocks over wandered up in jeans and a UT hoodie holding his own mug. He listened, read the deed, and declared on camera that any brand claiming exclusive rights was about to have a bad afternoon. Pierce's people tried to push through the crowd, but the volunteer brigade formed a polite wall of shoulders and humor that translated to "not today," and sometimes law is just a community deciding it remembers how to be one. We filed an emergency injunction before supper. Dell swore out an affidavit that would make liars itchy, and Mom signed a statement that explained where she'd been when we needed her and who she'd been helping when she couldn't be herself. Dad added his name to the "I did this" column, and the pen left a groove deep enough to plant seeds. By dusk, Lone Star scrubbed their socials. The billboard company yanked the face that didn't belong to them, and a rumor reached us that Pierce had been escorted from a lab where flavors go to be counterfeited into nothing worth tasting. None of that fixed my roof or my family, but all of it made the chili smell like victory with humility stirred in. When the streetlights hummed awake, we dragged weary chairs into the diner and ate from paper bowls at the counter like strangers who'd earned the right to be kin again. Mom sat in Grandma's booth, Dad across from her, Luke at the corner like a penitent altar boy, Dell at the end with his hat tilted back and his eyes half closed like a man finally off duty. Outside, the neon steadied and held. I poured coffee into Grandma's old mug and set it beside the register. Steam curled like handwriting, and for a moment the room listened, the way rooms do when they remember someone they love is about to speak. I didn't hear a voice, exactly more a feeling shaped like words, and it said, as it always had, "Keep stirring." Later, when the crowd thinned and the firefighters packed up their hoses like faithful snakes, Luke approached me under the neon's pink blush and said, "I'll work here if you'll have me no title, no shares, just shifts." And I said, "Start with the dishes, because redemption is less poetry than elbows in hot water." And he nodded with relief that made him look 9 again, holding a broken sparkler. Mom traced the edge of the recipe framed on the wall, eyes bright. "She rigged the world, so love would always win if someone was stubborn enough to keep cooking," she said, then handed me a small envelope that smelled like cedar and rain. Inside lay a second index card in Grandma's hand. "Whoever forgives first owns tomorrow," and for once I didn't argue with instructions. We locked up close to midnight under a sky that looked washed clean. On the sidewalk, the community had chalked a messy mural, bowls and stars, and a crooked window with "Be the Window" scrawled across it, and for the first time, I understood what Grandma meant. Don't wait for permission to tell the story. Open, pour, and let the light through. I stood in the doorway and thought of every fire we'd put out and every one we'd lit on purpose, of every bowl carried to a table that needed it, and every debt that had tried to break us. I thought of a billboard face that wasn't hers, a lab that printed flavors like lies, a county that remembered itself just in time, and a family that would spend the rest of its life getting the recipe right. Then I flipped the sign to open even though it was past closing, because grief and joy don't care about hours, and served late bowls to whoever wandered by hungry enough to try. In the steam I saw Grandma, not younger, not older, just exactly who she always was when the story mattered, the woman who made promises you could eat. Final lesson. In a world that will sell anything with a label, the only things that can't be stolen are the ones you give away on purpose: love, forgiveness, and the work of feeding people until they remember who they are. Protect your name if you must, but protect your practice more, because the truest ownership isn't on paper or a sign. It's in the hands that keep stirring when the fire gets high, the roof catches, and the neighbors start to line up with empty bowls. If you liked my story, let me know in the comments and also tell me which city you're watching from. Let's talk there. If you want to support me, send a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories for you. Thank you so much for your love and support. I'll be waiting to read your comments. There's much more on my channel, so don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.